We only want to admit those into our country who will support our country.
Coming up, President Trump's immigration order.
No hate, no fear. Refugees are welcome here.
How one of the most diverse cities in the nation reacted.
We want the Anchorage Assembly and the mayor to publicly condemn Trump's ban and his wall.
But Alaska is also the state that put the president in the White House.
I think they should close the border totally from any kind of travel.
Also on Frontiers, the David and Goliath story of a telecommunications pioneer.
Oh my God, yes. Of course.
Ahead, how Bob Welp changed history.
Sponsorship for Frontiers with Rhonda McBride is provided by your local Alaska Toyota dealers. Toyota, let's go places. Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers. With challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come. Bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers, week 2 of Donald Trump's presidency, and the roller coaster of emotions continues over his immigration order. On this episode of Frontiers, we look at how it affects Alaska, one of the most diverse states in the country. And there is a lot to talk about this half hour, so we begin the conversation with Joe Vigil, who has followed the story all week.
Well, Rhonda, the president's executive order bans all refugees from coming to this country for the next 120 days. It also bans immigrants from 7 predominantly Muslim countries from entering the U.S. for the next 3 months. Now, Alaskans on both sides are certainly not silent.
I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here.
That quickly fired up national protest last weekend. Demonstrators gathered outside JFK International Airport in New York and demanded the release of refugees blocked from entering the U.S.
Let them in! Let them in!
And while the president calls it vetting, others call it religious discrimination. And the ACLU quickly sued, with federal judges blocking part of the president's order.
It's not a Muslim ban, but we were totally prepared. It's working out very nicely.
No hate, no fear. Refugees are welcome here.
The wave of protest quickly landed in Alaska that same night at Ted Stevens International Airport. People held signs with messages like "Anchorage welcomes immigrants" and "Anchorage stands in solidarity."
And making a stance and telling Trump that this is not just, it's not fair, it's not constitutional.
A day later, on Sunday in Anchorage, more protests. Some gatherings were quite small.
No man, no wall.
Another downtown, quite large, both with a similar message.
Is totally un-American, is totally against what we stand for.
The ACLU says around 80 immigrant families, 6 from Iraq, are in the pipeline to come to Anchorage, who will now have to wait. Farhan Abdi is from Somalia, just returned from there visiting his pregnant wife. He says we have to be safe, but doesn't think President Trump's plan is the way to do that.
We just have to take actions, whatever it is. This is not acceptable.
And while the worry reverberated through the state's Muslim community and the Anchorage School District, we found a number of people who say the president is doing the right thing.
I think they should close the border totally from any kind of travel, temporarily, until they get rid of the problem of people coming in the country to blow it up or whatever that they plan to do that is evil or bad.
People just don't understand it's only temporary. Like, you know, it's going to end and we're going to figure things out. Hopefully they figure things out. I think it's more of a problem with the Middle East than Donald Trump.
Meanwhile, President Trump has given his generals and security advisors 30 days to come up with a plan to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So, Rhonda, certainly a lot going on, happening very quickly. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Joe, for the overview. Up next, from the streets of Anchorage to the halls of the state capitol, why this executive order stirs up so many emotions and Anchorage's First Lady and a former mayor weigh in on the potential fallout. In Juneau this week, protesters pressed Governor Bill Walker to speak out against the order. The governor says he's concerned about how it will affect the state and has asked the Alaska Attorney General to advise him on how this state should respond. The debate also spilled into the legislature, where lawmakers weighed in on the president's action.
The president is right that we should keep unsafe people out, but he is wrong that we should keep safe people out. People who have worked with the American military, he's banning. People who have been vetted, he's banning. And it was sloppy, and we can't do soundbite politics.
We're a sovereign nation if we can't determine who comes into our country based on terrorist activities and those things that are a threat to national security. We've got bigger problems than we thought we did.
Well, joining us now to talk more about why this issue hits home in Alaska, we have Anchorage's First Lady, Mara Kimmel, and Rick Mystrom, a former Anchorage mayor who helped found Bridge Builders, a group that formed to promote diversity and tolerance in Anchorage. And Mara, I might also mention that you are heading up the Welcoming Anchorage community through the mayor's office in the municipality. Yeah. So both of you have a lot of background on immigration. And first, I guess I want to just get a sense from you how you feel about the president's order. You want to start, Rick?
Sure. Well, the first thing I've got to say is that we are a city that really welcomes refugees and immigrants, and we get along so well, so diversified. So we're so diversified, and we've really shown how a diverse city can work well. But I think the important thing specifically about this order to understand is that it's been played in the newspapers all across the country as an anti-Muslim issue, an anti-Muslim order. But the fact is it's not. There's 55 predominantly Muslim countries in the world, and 7 were identified. Now, how they were identified, I think that's something the president and the CIA and maybe Congress is aware of. And I can only presume that they are countries that they are most concerned about for violence against the United States. But it isn't against all the Muslim countries. And the second thing I think is very important to understand is it's temporary. And I presume it's temporary to give the president and the new administration the chance to make sure that they feel comfortable in protecting the country from problems.
Mara?
Sure. Well, first I want to say you mentioned welcoming Anchorage, and the whole point behind signing on as a welcoming community is that our city developed the capacity to be able to separate fact from fear and then create policies that impact on our immigrant refugee community that are based on facts and not fear. And so part of those facts I know that you're going to show up on the screen fairly soon in terms of the economic contributions.
Yeah, we'll have some snapshots of our immigrant population.
Great. But I think that one of the things that's happening right now as a result of the executive orders is a lot of fear is being stirred up, and not a lot of that fear is based on facts. And I think that one of the things that we need to remember when we're talking about the executive orders is that refugees in particular, amongst all of the different types of immigrants that come into the United States, are the most seriously vetted. And so we do determine who comes into our country through an extensive process of making sure that people go through a number of security and background checks.
Well, let's look at why this issue hits home here in Anchorage. And we want to show you the growth in our immigrant population. U.S.-born citizens in Alaska are growing at about 6%, foreign-born residents 1%, a little above. But there's also another element to this picture.
Sure, and that element is that in Anchorage, 9% of our overall population is foreign-born, and in the state of Alaska, it's 8%. And that compares to an average in the United States of 13%. So we are an incredibly diverse community and also one of the most rapidly diversifying communities in the country. But our overall numbers are on the lower side.
But let's look at our immigrant population, the top 5 groups. I think some of our viewers might be surprised. People from the Philippines at the top of the list, but then way down there in the top 5, Dominican Republic. I'm surprised by that.
We've got people from all over the place, and I'm sure that there are a number of Salvadorans the number of Salvadorans probably closely mirrors the Dominican Republic. We just have an incredible diversity from all over the world, and it makes our community that much richer.
Now, you formed the Bridge Builders Group years ago because I guess you kind of foresaw this coming wave of immigrants and how important it would be to our community. What's the economic implication of having a robust immigrant population?
Well, what we found out and what over the years has really ratified the importance of bridge builders is our immigrants are hardworking people. They tend to take, in general, some of the lower paying jobs. You walk into a McDonald's and you see people working hard and moving, and they're part of our immigrant population. From the standpoint of them creating businesses on their own and working for and buying product that's produced here. So
now, there are some numbers on their contribution to the overall economy, and I think their goods and services that they contribute almost $2 billion, and then more than $500 million in spending power. That's amazing. And let's look at their rate of entrepreneurship. Foreign-born residents are self-employed, which means that they're small business folks at a rate of more than 11% higher than U.S.-born. And also, let's look at their rate of self-employment. We have about 1,800 foreign-born Alaskans in Anchorage that contribute to the economy as self-employed, and their income is about $37 million that they produce. So that's a big picture. So I guess that's why it hits home. But let's talk a little bit about how this immigrant order sort of affects people in Alaska.
Sure. First, though, can I just mention that I think there's, again, the whole point of the Welcoming Anchorage movement is to separate myths and misinformation from hard facts and hard data. And the numbers that you just showed up on the screen are numbers that we've been able to produce, data that we've been able to produce by taking a serious look and doing an economic analysis. And what it demonstrates to us is that, in fact, the foreign-born community in our city are job makers. They are not job takers. And I think that that's a really important distinction to consider when you're looking at the impacts of ebbs and flows in immigration policy at a national level and how they can impact on our city and our future. Because if we are going to be curtailing the ability of foreign-born citizens to actively engage and participate in our community, there will be ripple consequences, negative consequences for our economy.
So one of the things that's interesting is both of you have worked together on immigration issues in the past. And you have this very compelling story about something that you brought to Mara to work on.
In Malawi, when I was there working at an orphanage in Malawi, my wife and I were there, we met an Afghan family whose there was a mother, father, and 3 daughters. And they were from Afghanistan. They were threatened by the mullahs. The mullahs came, the religious leaders of that community came and wanted to buy the daughters from the husband. They, of course, refused, and the mullahs said, if you refuse, we'll kill you and take your daughters. Well, that night, they packed up just essentials and started walking. They got into Pakistan, made their way to Malawi, and then they wanted to get into America. And so I worked with Mara, and she helped immensely and sort of helped carry us through this. And ultimately, and Mara doesn't know this, but they have got out of, they're doing well now. The parents are in San Diego. And so
I guess
there
we
are
have
victims.
to remember
I think
that.
the message at the point is there are victims out there. And that's why I'm okay with it as a temporary order, but as a permanent order, I would not be supportive of that.
And we want to mention that we record this show on Friday, so there may be some developments on Sunday with a judge making a decision on whether or not to block this ban. But one of the things that we should talk about here is the unintended consequences. Do you worry about that with the ban?
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of families here in our city and in our state that are directly impacted by the president's executive order and that will continue to be impacted. And there are a lot of people in limbo right now and a lot of people who don't know whether they will be able to rejoin their families or join their families in our city. And we have a fairly consistent pipeline of refugees coming into Anchorage. This definitely impacts on that flow and on the people who are already here who are waiting for family members from the other side.
So last word, Rick. Do you feel that this is a partisan issue?
I do. At first, wasn't sure, but I think it really is. And the supporters of Trump are more likely to look at it from a positive angle, and the opponents of Trump from a negative angle. So I think it's certainly become partisan. But I do think that there's a right the president has to say, I want to stop things in this particular way for a few months and decide what we have to do and then go forward. But I would not be supportive of broad bans of just countries that weren't temporary.
Mara, just a tiny bit of time left.
Sure.
Do you feel it's partisan?
Absolutely not. I feel that once you put a human face on the issue and know and understand the facts of the issue, that people come together around this and come together around our community.
I want to thank you both very much for being with us, Mara Kimmel and former Mayor Rick Mystrom. And just ahead, most Alaskans have probably never heard of Bob Walp, one of the founders of GCI.
She said, over my dead body.
But Bob Walp's wife, Virginia, relented and agreed to mortgage the family home. How that changed the history of telecommunications in Alaska. The founder of GCI is gone, but Bob Walp's legacy lives on. He died last month in California at the age of 89. Now, we should point out to you, there is a KTVA connection to this story. Our station is owned by GCI. And in the summer of 2013, GCI asked me to sit down with Bob Walp at his home in Pasadena and ask him about his role as an Alaska telecommunications pioneer. Well, I have to admit, I was totally charmed by him and his story. It's here in Pasadena where you'll find the house that saved GCI, the home of Bob Walp, who founded the company in 1979. Back then, GCI was not the big business it is today, with more than 2,300 employees who provide an array of telecommunications services. In its early days, GCI was a struggling telephone company, and at one point, Bob Walp had no choice but to mortgage his home, and his wife, Virginia, wasn't happy.
She said, over my dead body. But we ended up getting a second mortgage for $80,000, and that saved the company.
Somehow, Walp persuaded Virginia it was worth the risk, which allowed him to focus on the big picture.
It's quite an earth. Too bad it isn't getting along better with itself.
To bridge Alaska's communication divide with satellites, Walp's big dream. He believed a series of seemingly random events led him to found GCI. His random walk, or as he called it, random Walp, began in Brazil, where he worked on a satellite communications project, which taught him a lot of the things he needed to know to help Alaska. But he didn't know that until years later, when NASA sent him to Alaska to consult on a satellite education project, which led to a job in Governor Jay Hammond's administration as head of the new state telecommunications office.
What do you see as being the real use of the satellite technology in the future?
At the time, there were very few phones in rural Alaska, but Walp envisioned a modern communications center in every village.
Which would contain television monitors and videotape recorders. They would have facsimile machines. They would, of course, have telephones. And also computer terminals, such as this one here.
Are there any non-budgetary priorities?
Walp even foresaw the technology that led to today's televised gavel-to-gavel coverage. Only in his vision, people would testify on camera.
So each party could watch the others listening and paying attention to them.
Is that a real possibility or just a far-off theory?
Oh, no, it's a very definite possibility.
But Walp faced a major obstacle. Alaskans, the telecom giant of the day, and he was David to Alaskans' Goliath, which initially fought satellite technology. Walp believed the only way to change the game was to bring in more competition and make the state a player in that process.
If you have two or more firms going after the same market, each one is going to try to design its product and price it so that it will sell, not the others.
But Alaskans didn't want to play that game and lobbied the legislature to eliminate the telecommunications office, which effectively cost Walp his job.
They were very heavy-handed, and Bob had become a pain in the neck to them. Bob was getting good at showing what satellite technology could do.
If there had not been a Bob Walp, how different would our world be?
This would be a very different place if he hadn't come to Alaska in the early 70s and if Alaskcom hadn't taken his job away from him in 1979. So strangely enough, you can thank both Bob and his archenemy, Alaskcom, for our presence here.
Walp's random walk led him to Ron Duncan, a young gun in Alaska's fledgling cable TV industry. Together, they formed a company.
Oh, here, this is for my new car.
Walp mapped out the plans for GCI on computer punch cards just like these, which he used right up until his death.
I want to know where those went in his estate, because I'm sure he had several 100,000 of them left over when he died.
Here at the Hotel Captain Cook, as Walp and his wife toasted the company's future, they settled on a name.
Probably the martinis.
Whatever the inspiration, Walp wanted the name GCI, General Communication Incorporated, to carry the company into the information age.
I wanted to make it all-encompassing, so it wasn't restrictive.
And competitive.
Literally for the first 10 years, nobody believed that competition really was a good thing.
The competition between GCI and Alaskcom, which later became AT&T Alaskcom, became known as the Great Phone Wars, which played out in the newspapers from Washington, D.C. to the halls of Juneau and to the ballot box. Eventually, GCI broke into the long-distance market to the lower 48 and then went statewide.
The consumers who before GCI started paid $1 a minute to call New York and $3 a minute to call Juneau.
Competition improved the bottom line for customers and laid the foundation for Alaska's Internet Highway. Competition Bob Walp pushed with revolutionary zeal. Most people would not know who Bob Walp was.
Who remembers anything from 1978?
Robert is the author of his own underappreciation, but the fact that he is underappreciated is very true.
Richard Dowling was Walp's engineer when they worked for the state, part of the trio that launched GCI.
He was that initial infectious agent that created the now virtuous cycle of innovation that goes on in telecommunication.
Walp liked to describe himself as the flea on the rhinoceros's back.
If courage is defined as being willing to go forward in the face of adversity and criticism, then I think he's courageous. He certainly was courageous in putting his beloved home in Pasadena on the line.
So what if Bob Walp had failed to persuade his wife to mortgage their home? Looking back on it, are you glad you did it?
Oh my God, yes. Of course. There are a lot of people who are glad I did.
Bob Walp, one of the unsung heroes of Alaska's technology revolution. Now, Bob Walp's random walk, or random Walp, began as a kid. He was big into ham radios, and his parents saw his passion for technology, so they pulled him out of high school to go work at a nuclear power plant to be mentored by scientists. All part of the random Walp journey to Alaska. But that's how it is here. One thing leads to another. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.